Okay, hey there, folks. Since book tour and conventions are still on hold for a while longer, I figured I would bring book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 3, intriguing interviews with creative minds. And it's an exciting night tonight for two reasons. First, this is my 25th broadcast, so thanks to everyone who helped make the show possible. And I can't think of a better way to mark the Big 25 than with tonight's guest. He is the award-winning, best-selling author of 70 books and nearly 100 short stories spanning science fiction, horror, adventure, medical thrillers, and virtually everything in between. With 9 million copies sold and his work translated in 24 languages, 23 more than I speak, he is the author of The Keep and the Repairman Jack series, among others. Welcome, F. Paul Wilson. Hello, Paul.
Hi there, Russ. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. This is going to be a great hour. Okay, so just a quick heads up to the folks who are watching at home. If you have any questions or comments for me or for Paul throughout the hour, feel free to send me a note in the chat box and we'll get to it at the end of the show. Okay, so let's just start at the beginning as we always do. So where were you born and where'd you grow up?
I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, in Margaret Haig Hospital, and grew up in Hackensack, New Jersey, which is just maybe 10 miles over the George Washington Bridge from Manhattan.
All right, a Jersey boy. So let me ask you, what was it like growing up back then, near New York City at the time? Did you go into the city much back then, or did you stay on your side of the river?
No, my father commuted every day to New York City, and
what did he do?
He worked for Pfizer International.
Oh, he did.
On 42nd Street.
Yeah, I know the building. Yeah, what did he do?
And he was with the he was actually an accountant with Arthur Anderson, who helped set up the books for Pfizer International for their international division. And when he did that, they said, why don't you come on board, since you know how everything is set up? And he said, yeah. And so he eventually wound up to be a vice president. He was an immigrant from England at age 6. And
what part of England?
He actually he was born in Liverpool.
In Liverpool, okay.
Yeah. His parents were Scots from Glasgow. But they had a tea shop in Liverpool and they just couldn't make a go of it. So they came to the New World. And he put himself through college and got a CPA. And it was sort of, the typical American success story. He came from nothing and wound up pretty successful.
I actually have a very quick interlude just about the Pfizer building. Earlier in my career, I was a journalist years ago, and I was a healthcare reporter. My first job in doing that was for a pharmacy magazine. And I got a call one day from Pfizer, from their PR department, saying, you need to come over. We're announcing a new drug. I'm like, okay, I just eaten lunch. And it turns out, I didn't know this at the time. I had Lyme disease for many, many years, but I didn't know it then. And I had a severe gluten allergy, and the two of them would overwhelm me. So I would fall asleep sometimes during the day. So I was sitting in the back of the room of this stuffy conference room at the Pfizer building on 42nd Street. They're about to announce the new drug. I was in the back and I actually fell asleep. And the drug they announced was Viagra. So on the day they were announcing the drug, how to keep it up, I fell asleep. But I digress. Okay, so you're in the city. Did you go into the city with your dad? Did you visit him?
He would take me in on Saturdays. Sometimes I'd play with the adding machine, and that was the old mechanical kind where you pulled the handle.
Right.
But I wound up going to high school there. I went to Xavier High School on 16th Street.
Oh, you did.
So I spent 4 years commuting, and during the commutes I would commute into the Port Authority, and they would have a B. Dalton bookstore there. Yeah. And that's where I discovered Edgar Rice Burroughs. And I saw this book called At the Earth's Core.
Right.
and it's by the author of Tarzan. I said, well, Tarzan, that guy that yodels, I don't, that's not a great recommendation for me.
Right.
But there were people riding dinosaurs on the cover. And I just couldn't resist. I had to buy that, put down my 35 cents. And then, I said, wow, this is great. And it really made the time go fast on the commute. So every time a new one came out, I'd pick it up.
So was it just you? Did you have brothers, sisters?
Yeah, I had one brother, one sister, two cats and a dog.
Were they older, younger?
I was the oldest. My brother is 2 years younger, and my sister was 6.
Did you guys get along?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my brother and I butted heads every once in a while, but basically, my sister was too far behind me to really get in my face much. But she's the one who introduced me to the Beatles. She was an immediate Beatle fan. And in 63, she bought their first album, and that was all I heard when I was in the house because she never stopped playing it. And, they grew on me. And so eventually I became a Beatles fan.
So were your parents, did they encourage, were they sort of encouraging of you to sort of follow your own interests, or were they sort of strict with you? What was that like back then?
Well, my father was very adamant about not working for anybody because he worked for Pfizer. He was independent sort. He hated to have a boss. And he always said, whatever you do, try to work for yourself. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, be a veterinarian, whatever you can do to work for yourself. And that, and I was a science nerd anyway, so.
Wait, so hold on. Don't skip past that. So what does that mean? What kind of a science nerd were you?
I loved astronomy. I had my own chemistry set. I was like a mad scientist in the basement. Almost set fire to the house down there.
Did you actually?
Well, I managed to put the fire out before.
So there was an actual fire brewing in your basement.
Well, yeah, because I had spilled the alcohol from the heating. You used to have that little burner.
The Bunsen burner?
No, it wasn't Bunsen.
Okay.
But you filled it up with alcohol, and it had a little wick, and then you would heat up your chemicals with that. And I cleared out the house a number of times with hydrogen sulfide and things like that.
Was this while your parents home at the time? Did they raise holy hell about that?
Well, they didn't want to discourage me, but they did say you got to be more careful.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So look, you ultimately you went to medical school.
Yeah.
Right? So and was that because your dad was nudging you, or did you kind of follow that on your own instinct, or what got you there?
Well, he was nudging me. I had a tendency. I leaned towards the sciences, but I really wanted to write, and so when I graduated from college,
where'd you go to college?
Georgetown. I applied to be in Madison Avenue copywriter. I would have been one of the madmen. And so I applied to 3 agencies, and all 3 of them accepted me.
Really?
And what you had to do was to make up ads,
right,
and sample print ads, and and send them in. And so all 3 of them accepted me, and then I got my draft notice, and I said,
"Oh, geez, wait, so
you can go to Vietnam, or you can go to medical school, because you ain't going to Madison Avenue."
So you dreamed of Don Draper was shot down, huh?
Yeah, but it worked out for better. I know people who have to write during the day for their job, and then they come home and they try to write at night.
That's me.
It's tough.
Yes, it is.
So, I think that worked out for the best for me. Also, being a doctor, I stayed in touch with people all the time.
Wait, so hold on. But where did you go to medical school?
Out in Missouri.
In Missouri. Okay. So did you go, so you got your MD and you went into practice?
Yeah, I had a rotating internship, and then I joined a group practice at the Jersey Shore.
You did. Was it a general practice? Did you have a specialty?
No, it was all family practitioners.
Okay.
We were all family practitioners. I liked the variety. For a while, I wanted to be, I was thinking of going into cardiology, and I even went to, St. Barnabas, and I did a little time there in the cardiology department. And I decided just treating one organ didn't do it for me.
Okay.
So I took my family practice boards and became a family practitioner.
So all right. So we touched upon it just a little bit. So you had a little taste of, you read Edgar Rice Burroughs when you were commuting back and forth from Manhattan for school. What else were you reading, watching, absorbing at that time?
Oh, anything weird. You couldn't find horror fiction back then. So you had to be satisfied with science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, occasionally there would be an anthology like The Macabre Reader, or occasionally some Lovecraft would appear, but nothing regular. Science fiction was the big thing. And fantasy. I didn't think I liked fantasy. But I belonged to the science fiction book club.
Right.
And I forgot to mail in my card one time. And I got these two weird books called Cat's Cradle by this guy,
Kurt
Vonnegut. And I got Three Hearts and Three Lions by Poul Anderson. And I said, well, one sounds really weird, but I'll read it. And the other one is fantasy, and I don't want to read it. But it came to a time when I had nothing else to read, so I picked it up.
Right.
And I loved it. He mixed humor and heroic fantasy. And it's a delightful book. It's been copied, it's been imitated so many times that somebody who picks it up now will say, that's not terribly fresh. But back then, it was great.
So did you always have, from an early age, were you always drawn to sort of the darker fiction? Was that an instinct for you?
Yeah, well, I think we're wired for certain things.
Right.
And I remember, how old was I? I was probably nine years old when the trailer for The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms came on the TV. And I've said it before, I mean, I was like the face hugger on that TV. And I would sit there and I would just keep the TV on, hoping they would play it again sometime. I mean, I said I absolutely had to see that movie. And my parents didn't want me to go because it was summer and the polio vaccine hadn't come out yet.
Oh.
So you had to stay away from crowds if you were a kid.
Huh.
And, I didn't care. I'd risk polio, whatever, just so I could see this. And so, I finally came up with a solution. I said, how about a drive-in? Take me to a drive-in.
Ooh, right.
And they said, well, they couldn't come up with an argument against that. So my father took me one night to a drive-in and I saw it. It was great.
Oh, cool. Very cool. God, drive-ins are awesome. All right. So let me ask you. So you go to school, you become a doctor, you have a practice down on the Jersey Shore. What was the beginning of your transition into writing fiction? What was the first thing that you wrote?
Well, the thing was, I was writing in medical school and I was selling in medical school. I sold my first story in medical school, first few stories. I just couldn't not write. I had gotten so many rejection slips and I had written so many stories that didn't make it that I was just absolutely determined I'm going to sell one. And so in between my studies, I'd go to my little Olympia portable and bang out a story. And John Campbell finally told me why he rejected the story. And that was my writing course, because then after that, he used to tell me, what was wrong with the story.
Well, what did he say?
Well, the first one he said, This is not a story. Stories have beginning, middle, and end. This is a vignette. Send me a story. So he must have seen something in the writing. After rejecting me so many times, he said, hey, the guy's getting a little better, you know.
Right.
So
and this is for what publication?
Analog.
Analog.
So I did, you know, so first of all, I had to look up vignette because I didn't know what a vignette was. I never had a writing course. So, you know, basically I was going by what I had read, trying to sound like either Poole Anderson or Larry Niven or one of those guys that I like to read. I didn't want to sound like Burroughs because, you know, Burroughs was definitely of another age.
Right.
Even though, you know, he was a good storyteller, you know, and for most of his career. Yeah, I didn't want to sound like him, but the other guys were I liked, and Heinlein, of course. Mm-hmm. So finally, he accepted one, and then the next month, Bob Lowndes at Startling Mystery Stories accepted another story that Campbell had rejected, because I was always sending him around and around and around.
Right. So back then, what was the usual? So from submission, you know, because obviously it was snail mail back then, to getting back to you, what was a normal turnaround time back then?
3 or 4 months, maybe.
Right. Okay.
I had to keep a flow chart.
Right.
To know where they were and where they'd been and where they were going to go next, because I kept them in constant circulation.
Okay.
Spent a lot of postage. And the biggest fear was, you know, sometimes you would go commando and not have a carbon copy.
Right.
So if that manuscript got lost, that story was gone.
Oh, I did that years ago. I'm still kicking myself to this day.
Yeah. So that never happened. Although I had to type over the years, retype the first sheet. Uh-huh. And because you know, somebody put a coffee cup on it or a cigarette ashes or something. Yeah. But those days, everything's electronic now.
So you write across multiple genres, but typically a bit on the darker side. You know, is it just that, you know, when you were a kid, you said you were sort of drawn to this sort of more darker fiction? Is that just did that just, you know, transfer over to you from an author, or why kind of, I mean, not that everything is dark, but that seems to be kind of where you go. What's the inspiration for you, or what's the drive for you to write that way?
As I said, I think I'm wired that way. That's what I want to read. I've told the story before, but I'll tell it again. I mean, I was reading Alfred Hitchcock's 13 more stories they wouldn't let me do on TV. And I came across the October Game. And I came to that last line, and it said, and then some damn fool turned on the lights. And I'm saying, what the hell kind of ending is? I'm 13 or something. And what kind of ending is this? I said, holy shit. Ooh, now I get it. And that probably had one of the biggest influences on me, because it wasn't what he never described what went on in the room. Right. And at the end, you had to piece it together. And it just took you that little bit of time, that little lag time.
Right.
And all of a sudden you realize what he had been telling you all along, it gets thrown in a totally different context. And then you realize the horror of it without him actually
describing it.
It's like the Psycho shower scene.
Right.
You never see the knife go in.
No, never.
And it's also another very influential thing was the door scene from The Leopard Man. Do you remember that?
I don't, sorry.
The door scene where Maria is pounding on the door saying, you know, the leopard man, the leopard man, the leopard man. And the mother saying, Maria, you know, stop that. I'm not letting you in until you stop that. And all of a sudden she stops it. and then blood starts to flow under the door.
Oh Lord.
And it was Val Lewton. And that's the other one. I mean, that's another thing that was very influential, is that if you let the reader fill in the details, they can probably fill in more horrific, personally horrific details.
Right, than you could describe.
These are things that they will find horrible of what happened to me. We never saw what happened to Maria, but it wasn't good. You know?
Yeah, so it was like that, you know, and from Reservoir Dogs, you know, when he saws off his ear, you don't actually watch him do it, but just knowing what's going on just makes you cringe.
Yeah, but you're actually seeing him doing something to the guy.
Yeah, true.
And you know exactly what happened. You don't know what happened to Maria.
True. Fair enough. All right, so look, so The Keep is certainly one of the books that you're most known for. So what was the genesis of that book?
Well, I started with a book called Hotel Transylvania by Quinn Yarbrough, in which she had this sympathetic, heroic vampire. And, you know, I knew Quinn, and I don't know if I called her or wrote her a note or whatever. And I said, you know, I just can't buy a heroic vampire. I said, they're parasites. They feed off you. They can only have contempt for you. You know, we argued back and forth, blah, blah, blah. And I was thinking about it, and I was saying, wouldn't it be interesting if we had someone who's pretending to be a good vampire, who's not a vampire at all, because he's hiding something that's even worse.
Right.
And once I got that going in my head, then I started saying, well, okay, what could it be? And blah, 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 blah. Right. And I wanted to bring in all the vampire mythology and then turn it on its head. And I didn't have, the big vision, the big visual of the book for me was all these cross-studded walls, just festooned with these crosses.
Right.
And I said, but I don't want to have them, I don't want any Christian mythology here. I want to have it something else. And I couldn't figure out how to get around this. And then at 3 a.m, I woke up and I said, the hilt of a sword. And then everything came together.
Right. Okay. Wow. So what was it like? I mean, I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what was it like getting that turned into a movie? What was that like for you?
Well, it's weird because we sold the movie rights before we sold the book. Hollywood jumped right on it. We had an agent out there who's famous for never reading, never finishing a book. Right. Always has his assistant finish it or whatever. He wrote my agent and said, I actually read this whole book. He said, Nazis and vampires. I'm going out with it just like that. And so we sold it like that. And then William Morrow hadn't even seen it yet. But William Morrow bought the book. It was very exciting. Sure. It's like my 4th novel, and I get this really nice hunk of change.
Sure.
For they used the advances used to be big back then, and they moved very quickly with it. But it was CBS Theatrical Films who had taken it, and they hired Michael Mann to do script and screenplay and direct. But they had their first 2 movies flopped, and all of a sudden they had to cut their budgets, and they could not do The Keep on the budget limits that they had. So it went into turnaround to Paramount. And which, by the way, on February 1st, I just got back the U.S. rights. That we captured the U.S. rights because it's been over 35 years.
Oh, so you got so The Keep is now back in your hands.
Yes.
Oh, very cool.
Well, U.S. rights.
U.S. rights.
The foreign rights are still
right.
So And already we have players wanting to option it.
Oh wow, that'd be cool.
Yeah, so it looks like it'll get remade.
Very good.
But you never know. The rights have been it would have been remade by now if the rights had been so tied up.
Right.
And no one's been able to actually explain to me why they're so tied up, but they are.
Indeed. So listen, so we can't talk about F. Paul Wilson without talking about Repairman Jack. So, and I read the Tomb actually not that long ago, but a year ago, and like a lot of people, I just he's quite a character, and I just fell in love with him immediately. Where did he's not really a private eye exactly. He's a fixer, sort of. He lives off the grid a bit. So where did this character come from?
Well, he came from a dream, actually. I was writing the book that would eventually become Reborn. And that was going to be my follow-up to The Keep. And I had this dream about something chasing me around a rooftop. And whatever I did, no matter what I did, it kept coming back. And it was, it was a scary dream. And I woke up and I said, oh, I got to use that somewhere. But then I had to figure out a character who would survive that. And then Jason Bourne was big at the time. And so I decided one of my things has been to turn cliches on their head.
Right.
And look at him from another angle. So I took Jason Bourne and I turned him on his head. And I came up with a character who was sort of his blue collar equivalent. He's never had black ops training. He's never been a Navy SEAL or a special ops guy. He's never been in the CIA. He's just a schmo from New Jersey,
right?
Who's got a chip on his shoulder. And he's built up his network of contacts, and he just is an urban mercenary. He fixes things. And I also had him live under the radar. That he's just invisible. He doesn't pay taxes. It was much more easy to be invisible back in 1983, 4 when I was writing this, because there weren't cameras everywhere.
Right.
It's a different story now. You can still do it, but it's a lot harder. But sure. Anyway, so that was the guy who was sort of a blue collar hero, and he was a guy you could have a beer with. You could see yourself having a beer with, whereas Jason Bourne, you really couldn't see yourself having a beer with him. I knew as I was writing it that this was a series character. I also knew I didn't want to write a series. Right. So I left him dying at the end of The Tomb. And it took me 14 years to write a second Repairman Jack novel.
So before I want to talk more about that, but before we get to that, so in The Tomb, we get a little bit of an origin story about Repairman Jack involving a brutal car accident. Was that a scene from your life or someone that you knew, or was that just sort of a bolt of inspiration?
Well, no, that was, I was up and down the turnpike in the Parkway a lot, as a Jersey boy.
Yep.
And you see those overpasses, you see people, standing on them, looking down the traffic. You see, what if one of those guys throws a cinder block? What's going to happen to the car it hits?
Nothing good.
No. And so I put that in there, just some asshole sociopath throwing something down on a car, and they're doing it all the time. You read about it all the time.
Yep.
So because I know, because my readers, every time they see a story like that, they send it to me on Facebook. I've seen a lot of those stories.
Yeah, so there's random crazy acts of violence that just sort of drops a grenade in your whole life. All right, so you went almost 15 years between Repairman Jack novels. I mean, I can understand at the beginning if you said, I don't necessarily want to write a series. Why so long? And then since then, you've been kind of all in on Repairman Jack. What changed for you?
Well, I just thought that he would take over my writing career. a series character. And at that time I already had the touch written in my head, and Black Wind was taking form. And then after that, they asked me to do a sequel to The Keep, and I did those 3 books: Reborn, Reprisal, and Night World. And then I wrote in 91 or so. I wrote a medical thriller because horror was dying. Reborn had, despite its awful cover, had nice 300,000 copy advance shipping, and that was great. But then the returns started coming in.
Right.
It wasn't selling, just like the rest of horror at the time. It wasn't selling, and so I was saying, and then the same thing happened with Reprisal, and I said, oh, this is a trend now. So I said, well, I've always avoided doing medical stories. So why don't I just do one about medical school? I'll do a medical school thriller. And I called it The Ingram. I wrote it under the name Colin Andrews because I didn't want people thinking it was another F. Paul Wilson horror novel.
Right.
So I didn't want any prejudice. Just judge the story as it is. And it got the biggest advance of my life.
Did you like writing it?
I did. I had a lot of fun with it because it wasn't a typical medical thriller where you have the heroic internist, doing all sorts of, ninja things. These were students, and they were being manipulated. So it was described as the firm goes to medical school. That's how somebody summed it up.
Okay, I could see that. I mean, were you able, I'm assuming you were able to draw from your own experiences in medical school and the people that you knew to sort of layer that context in there?
Very much, very much. So
let me just ask real quick, when you were in medical school, at any point did it cross your mind to write a story about medical school? I mean, while you were in it?
No, I wasn't really interested in doing that. I was trying to sell to John Campbell. That's what I wanted to sell to.
Gotcha.
In analog. There was no horror market except for maybe Bob Lowndes magazines, where Stephen King first got published, Greg Bear first got published. And he paid next to nothing, but the fact is he published it.
Right.
And it was, it's good for the ego, if nothing else.
For sure.
So that was my Ratman was my first sale, but it was not my first published story. The Cleaning Machine in Startling and Mystery Stories was my first published story. That was, holy crap. That was next month, 50 years ago.
Wow, really? Wow, congratulations. What an anniversary.
It was March 1971.
Wow. So, okay, so you
have to make a note of that.
Yeah, sure. So you had some interludes. So you ultimately came back to Repairman Jack. Was he sort of calling to you, or was your agent saying, hey, write one? Was it, what got you to that point where you said, okay, it's been 15 years. It's time to go back with Jack.
I'd already been back to him, Marty Greenberg had done an anthology called, what was the name of that called? It wasn't Predators. It was one before Predators. Well, anyway, it was supposed to be like thrillers. And they asked me, they said, can you do another Repairman Jack? And I said, yeah, why not? But even before that, Phyllis Weinberg, whose husband Bob was running the 1990 World Fantasy Convention, where I was a guest of honor, she was a big Repairman Jack fan, and I wrote a Repairman Jack short story for the program book. So I had dipped into him. It was Ed Gorman who was doing that thing with Marty, and Ed Gorman was a big Repairman Jack fan, and so he convinced me. So I did a day in the life for Stalkers. That was what it was called. It's called Stalkers, and so I had a 3-book medical thriller contract after the success of the Select, and so I did Implant, and then by the time I did Implant, I was already tired of medical thrillers. Okay. So I did Deep as a Marrow, which was really a political thriller with a doctor as a protagonist.
Right, okay.
And then I had this idea for a high-tech thriller, or techie anyway, and it would have been perfect for Jack. But it said you will write medical thrillers.
Right.
Contract. So I had him hired by a doctor, and
said, you slipped it in that way.
Hey, there's a doctor in it,
right?
And they knew what I was up to, right. But they liked the book. So that was Legacies. So they put it out, and it was a big hit. And they said, do another. I said, okay, one more.
Right.
And I did Conspiracies, and I had such fun researching that. And I said, you know what?
He's my guy.
It isn't right to have this much fun. I said, all right, so I'm gonna.
All right, you're ready. I'm in. Right.
I'm in. Yeah.
Right. All right, great. So listen, just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for me or for John, send them in the chat box, and we'll get to a few at the end of the show. All right, so Paul, so you've got some new stuff coming out. I'm gonna share my screen with everyone, and we're gonna take a look at what Paul's got for us here. So bear with me. What do we got here? All right, there we go. All right, so what do we got here?
All right, that's out in June. It's actually a reimagining of my first novel, Healer. It's brought into contemporary times. It has a millennial female as the heroine. Instead of Dalt, she's Daly. Part is still the same. And it has no resemblance to Healer. But changing her to female.
Just
it changed the whole dynamic of the thing between Dalt and Pard.
What inspired you to sort of revisit an old novel and redo it?
Well, it was Chris Morgan, who is he wrote one of the early. He wrote one of the later drafts of the Repairman Jack movie for Beacon Films, and he actually did. He took Craig Spector's good script and made it even better, but it never got made. But the thing is, I was a guest at San Diego Comic-Con, and he came down from LA, and we just hung out. And he said, "Oh, I've always loved Healer." And I said, "Well, how would you do that? Because Pard exists in Dalt's head, and movies are a visual medium." He said, "Oh, I would just have Dalt create, Pard create an avatar of himself that that Dalt could talk to." And I was saying, why didn't I think of that?
Right, they should have had a V8.
And so, and that that's why he's now in charge of the Fast and Furious franchise, and because he thinks like that, he thinks visually, and so I said, "Oh, I've got to take advantage of that. I've got to do it." Yep. And so that's what I did. Now Pard is someone she can see and talk to, and argue with, and I'm sort of known for my dialogue, and I think I have some of my best dialogue in this book. And there's going to be a second one. I'm just going to do two. Double Threat is not my title, but that's what we're stuck with because nobody ever likes my titles.
There you go.
They're not commercial for some reason. So
what
anyway,
what did you want to call it?
Duad.
Duad.
Duet is when two notes are played together.
Right.
And it really was perfect. It describes what it is. It's two minds in one body.
Right. Okay.
And but you know, the sales department said, no, that's never going to fly.
Right.
You know, when the sales department doesn't like it, nobody.
That's up. All right. So you got another one. What do we got here?
Oh, that's the current my current collection. It's small press. I took all my pastiches over the years. I've done stories using characters from Batman, the Joker, Lovecraft, Dick Tracy, Sherlock Holmes. I mean, I've all these anthologies, you know, using these other characters, and they always ask me for a story. And a lot of times it's I say no, but a lot of times it's somebody I want to play with, and so I called it other sandboxes because I'm playing in someone else's sandbox. It's a really thick book. It's like 560 pages. I didn't realize I had done that many until I put them all together. And a guy named Gerhard did the cover.
Cool.
He did all the backgrounds for Cerebus the Aardvark comic.
Oh wow, Cerebus, jeez, yeah.
And yeah, all those great backgrounds, that was him.
Oh, this is really same guy. Oh wow, that's cool. I didn't know that.
So you know, I never forgot his work. And I said, I tracked him down. And I said, you know, would you do it? You know, of course, for the money. He said, sure.
So if we want to read F. Paul Wilson short stories, this is the place to go.
This is, yeah. I mean, they're very diverse because I've always tried to copy the style of the person I was,
right.
You know, fooling around with.
All right, fair enough. Okay, so that was great. But as we always do at this point in the show, it is time to spin the wheel. Okay, on the wheel are 7 possible categories. Wherever it lands is what you get. The categories are fear of flying, cold case, stranger in a strange land, trick or treat, tell it to the judge, things that go bump in the night, and space meal. You ready? All right, you got space meal. All right, what do we got here? All right, so alien invaders have come to whisk you across the galaxy, never to return. You get one last meal before you go. What is that meal? Where are you? And who, if anyone, are you with?
Oh. Can it be dead people?
You name it, whatever you want. It's your last meal on Earth, that is.
Yeah, well, geez. I'm pretty much an omnivore, so I've always had trouble with this last meal thing, but I never get enough lobster. So it'd probably be a New York strip sirloin, a surf and turf, a New York strip sirloin, and a couple of lobster tails.
Talking my kind of talk.
And champagne. And for my guests, I would like to have H.L. Mencken, Dorothy Parker, Ogden Nash.
Ogden Nash. I remember him.
Have some great. He can do some great couplets while we're eating.
Sure.
Oh, my mind is slipping here.
That's right. That's a pretty good list.
Yeah.
All right. So all right, Paul. So you and I are both in the writing business. So let's go to our advice column. What's the best and worst writing advice someone ever gave you or advice you overheard?
Well, I don't think write what you know is necessarily good advice. I think you might be too comfortable with it, and it's better to write about something you don't know, look it up, learn about it, and then, you know, find out about it and then write about it. People sometimes who write what they know take too much for granted, and they slip into jargon and stuff like that. The best writing advice I ever had was write every day. And it's something I took to heart. As a beginning writer, I would write 3 pages a day, every day, 7 days a week. That was my minimum. I mean, if I had a Saturday off from the office and I was really rolling, I would keep going. But I would drive around with the radio off. I wasn't listening to other people. I was listening to me. And I would compose what I was going to write. So I could sit down and get it done because I already knew what I was going to write when I sat down.
Right.
And it didn't take me that long. And that's 21 pages a week. That's 540 pages in 6 months. That's enough. That's an novel.
For sure it is.
And the next 6 months, fiddling with it and outlining your next one, and then get going again. Oh. So that way you can do a novel a year and still have, I mean, I went to all my daughter's basketball games. You know, I didn't miss much of my family life because, and they would be in with me. You know, the little girls would be in with me. They'd be sitting on the floor reading some of my books. Charles Adams collections and stuff. They'd be, you know, they always like to go through those.
Right.
The dog would be in there chasing around the hamster that was in the ball, you know, rolling around. You know, and it didn't distract me. You know, it was really a very comfy thing to have them there.
Right.
And I would do my 3 pages and then I would put them to bed. You know.
All right. So look, so I've added a couple of new segments to the show, and the first is, and you touched on a little bit, the revision decision. So when writing a manuscript, whether it's a short story, a novel, novella, play, what have you, it will always require some revisions when you really dig in and clean up what you've got. Now, I've heard you talk about editing in the past, about how you do a considerable number of rounds of revisions. What's your approach to editing your work?
Well, first of all, I do what I call a vomit draft. I go straight through, no revisions, you know, nothing. I don't go back and change anything. I may go back and make some notes saying you got to change this, but I don't go back and change it. Then I let it sit a couple of weeks, or at least a week, and then I go back to it and by then I know the characters. When I start a book, I don't know my characters, but by the end of the book, I know them. I know what they've got to do to make the story work, and that's my big revision. And that's kind of fun. Then I send it out to the beta readers, and they come back with their comments, and I either accept or reject. Or
how many beta readers do you share it with typically?
Well, I've had up to 3. Right now, I've got 1 or 2. You know, if they both have a problem with something, then maybe I should look at it and maybe be casted.
I recall you saying at one point that you do up to 70 rounds of revisions. Is that right?
No.
No?
I don't know where you heard that. No. No.
I misheard that.
I would if you let me. But the thing is, because every time I read it, I find something wrong, or something I could phrase better. So, you know, there's a time when you've got to let it go and just say, this is as good as it's going to get, and then I have a great copy editor at Forge,
right?
For Forge, Becky Maines. She picks out stuff. You know, she's just great, and she also acts as a fact checker, which she doesn't really have to do, but she does. So she's also helped make the books, you know, accurate and good.
All right. So, and last, so now we're going to, I wanted to just talk about how you feel about the two-fisted love monkey. So as writers, when we put our work out there and ourselves, you know, criticism of all kinds comes with it. Criticism being the two-fisted love monkey, the good and the bad. So how do you feel about reviews? Do you take them to heart? Do you let them roll off you? Do some stick with you more than others?
Well, I don't read Amazon reviews. I read the professional reviews, the Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, Library News, and those. But the I used to read the Amazon reviews early on, and it's ridiculous. This is the worst book I've ever read. This is the greatest book I've ever read. I mean, what am I supposed to do with that? And there's very few are specific. I always feel I can learn from a bad review that's well considered, but just saying oh I didn't like this, or I love this book, that doesn't help me. So I don't even look at them anymore. I really I don't care. It's also, don't forget, been at this 50 years.
Sure.
It's not to say I can't learn stuff, because I always that's why I have beta readers. That's why I have editors. But just giving me your emotional response to the book doesn't help. It doesn't help me. So I don't bother looking at them.
Fair enough. Okay. So that was great, Paul. We have a few minutes before we go, so we're going to take a few questions from the audience. I got a couple here in the chat box. Let's see, what do we got? So we touched on it a little bit. Has being a doctor come in handy when it comes to your writing? Certainly on the medical thrillers, but have you found it useful in anything else over the years as you've been writing?
Actually, I avoided medical subjects. It was too much like going to work. Writing is my golf game. I've tried golf. I really find it boring as hell. And I can find much better ways to spend 3 or 4 hours of an afternoon than chasing that white ball around. So I tried to avoid. I made an exception with there is that thing that you find recurring in my work, is the miracle cure. And that's, from the frustration of being a doctor and running up against things that just don't have a cure.
Right.
And so, that's a recurring theme. But other than that, the select and implant are definitely, medical oriented. But as a rule, I write to get away from medicine, to give me a break from medicine.
Fair enough. All right, so here's another one. In addition to science, there's an introduction of the Rokoshi from myth. Do you have an interest in mythology, and why a demon from Hindu mythology?
Because I wanted something different. No one had been doing any. This is 1983, right. Actually maybe 82. No one had. I was looking for something different, different boogeyman. And I was going through the card file at the library. You people probably don't know card files.
Oh, sure. Good old Dewey Decimal.
Yeah, Dewey Decimal card file. And I was looking up, monsters and this and that and whatever. I was coming up blank. And then I saw this thing, The Demons of Rajpur by the Bang sisters. And it was about these things they called them Rakashas. And they were shapeshifters, but they were flesh eaters, and they were much less bestial than my Rakashi. They would actually take the form of the Maharaja's wife and get impregnated by him, and then have a changeling child. I didn't want to open that can of worms. So I just had them flesh-eating beasts, but I had a name for them, and I had a country of origin, and that's so that's
okay. All right, we got one more for you. So was there a specific inspiration for the fifth harmonic book that has always stuck with me even around all the others?
Yes, it was my barber.
That's not an answer you hear that often.
Well, he had found this lump on the side of his throat. It turned out to be a cancer.
Oh, gee.
He had radiation. It was cured, but it also, fried his salivary glands, so he had to keep sipping water all the time. And Yeah, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, it could have been so much worse if it had found later or something, because I've seen people with the radical, you know, neck dissections. Even they remove part of it. Look at Roger Ebert, where they
Right.
remove part of his jaw. I said, I would rather die than do that. You know, that's not living to me.
Right.
And then I said, all right, let me take a character with that attitude and see where I can go with this.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the only book I've ever written where I didn't kill anybody.
Okay. Oh, all right. We got one last one, and then that'll be it. So, was it challenging to take into account the changes in available technology from the subsequent Repairman Jack stories?
Very much, very much. We are now in a 1984 society. We are under constant observation. Um, and so, you know, Jack's always got pulling down that cap,
Yeah. Yep.
putting the brim over his face, and another thing you ought to have to do is hide your ears somewhat, because ears are one of the real telltales. Even if you hide your face and you leave your ears out, they can identify you from that. Facial recognition is just amazing these days.
Scary. Huh. Interesting. Wow. Okay. So that was great. Paul's going to do. So we talked about your new books. We've got two. One of them is out. One of them's coming. Where can folks get them? And then what's next for you?
Oh, I've been writing so much during this pandemic that I've got books backed up. I've got two cozy mysteries. I think I'll publish under another name.
Oh, that's cool.
I've got another horror novel I just finished. I just finished editing. It's called The Compendium of F. It's all my short fiction in 3 volumes. Things are really, and I have the sequel to Double Threat.
Right, coming out. Wow. So you've been a busy boy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thank Paul. I want to thank you for a great hour, and I want to thank everyone who's watching. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and since we've been talking about combinations of science fiction, horror, mystery, and crime, I'll encourage you to check out my own sci-fi noir, Crackle and Fire, featuring my hard-boiled intergalactic private eye, Angela Hardwick, part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, and part Philip Marlowe. And Crackle and Fire, Hardwick is hired to find a missing intern with stolen corporate files, but soon finds herself tackling with dueling gangsters, conflicted protesters, and a madman from Earth with galactic ambitions of his own. Crackle and Fire is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to everyone who's watching. This was a great hour, and I'll see everybody next week. All right, take care.